Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Outer Rim Cantina. My name's Alan and today I'm here to talk about Star Wars Resistance. And yes, I know that the show is pretty old at this point. I mean, first of all, it's kind of short. Second of all, the second and final season aired last year in 2019 and it's 2020 and I am just finally getting around to watching it. But if I'm being honest, it was never that appealing to me. I really didn't have any interest in watching Resistance while it aired because, well, it was a kid's show, more so than the Clone Wars, and even more so than Rebels was. But since the complete series is on Disney Plus, I figured, why not? I might as well give it a shot, and straight out of the gate, I'm just gonna say that it was fun. It was, and it was good for what it was, which obviously was a kid's show. And when I say it was even more of a kid's show than the Clone Wars or Rebels was, I mean that, well, you could really tell that the target audience was like kids 10 and younger, but just based on the content of the show. And like, for instance, one example that I saw throughout the entire series was that the great lengths they went to avoid killing people as much as possible, or avoid showing people dying as much as possible, at least up until the final 2 episodes of Season 2, where they just went bananas with shooting stormtroopers all over the place, which, I mean, I enjoyed, obviously, because stormtroopers are meant to be shot, but that's beside the point. Really, the whole show was focused on not killing people as much, and sure, there were a few instances where they showed, like, TIE fighters being blown up, but other than that, every time they had, like, confrontations with stormtroopers, they would always use the stun option on the blaster instead of the kill option, so it would just knock the stormtroopers out. And in the few episodes where they, like, stole trooper armor to disguise themselves, they knocked the trooper out instead of killing the trooper, and it was really obvious what they were going for throughout the entire show. Which, I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because not every single Star Wars show, or specifically animated show, needs to be geared towards an audience that's slightly more mature. And this is coming from a kid that grew up with Star Wars: The Clone Wars. I started watching The Clone Wars when I was 8, and it finished up its original TV run when I was about 13 or 14, I think, right? So, wow, I'm old. But anyways, with that show, I felt like it grew up with me. So, like everybody knows, like the first 2 seasons of the Clone Wars are pretty childish and goofy, and they're just fun. But then, starting with Season 3, things start to get a little bit on the darker side of things, as, you know, the Clone Wars progress and all of that stuff. And then, of course, Season 4 with the Umbara arc, Season 5 with the whole Jedi Temple bombing, and then Ahsoka being blamed. All of that lovely stuff. I just felt like with that show, it kind of grew up with me, and I understand that Resistance didn't have that same luxury with only having 2 seasons, but it still felt very childlike, which I'm not knocking for what it was, because like I said, it was a fun show. It's just the characters weren't really that memorable for me. The story, the plot, wasn't that appealing to me, and I highly doubt I will ever get the itch to go back and rewatch the show, because there were a lot of places where they had a lot of good stuff set up. Like, the first half or so of Season 1 was probably my favorite part of Resistance, like up until it caught up with the Force Awakens timeline. So in the first few episodes, right, it was before the events of the Force Awakens, and it was kind of setting up the Resistance and kind of sort of filling in that 30-year gap between Return of the Jedi and the Force Awakens. And it set up kind of what the Resistance was, explained it a bit more. It kind of addressed some of the stuff that I feel should have been addressed in the films themselves. Like, for instance, in Rebels, we learn that Leia actually started the Resistance about 6 years before the events of The Force Awakens, so about 24 years after Return of the Jedi, and it's also alluded to, although, like, not explicitly stated kind of, that the Resistance is a fringe group from the New Republic, and the reason for that being because after the Empire was defeated, the New Republic didn't want to have some big huge military and be like fear and warmongering like the Empire, so they disbanded the military and just had a small New Republic navy that was kind of more like a security force than an actual navy. And so a lot of the pilots from the New Republic Navy were then decided to, or recruited into the Resistance, which was the group that actually saw the threat the First Order possessed, and wanted to kind of stop it before they could become, like, truly become the Empire 2.0, basically. But the New Republic, they didn't believe the First Order existed, they didn't believe they were a threat, so they kind of just ignored the problem, and that's why Leia was kind of ostracized from politics, and then started the Resistance. And all of that is kind of explained in some other books and like ancillary material that has been filling in the gap right for the past few years since the sequel trilogy started, but none of that has really been explained on screen, and the Resistance and Star Wars Resistance is the first show to kind of explain some of that stuff on screen. Like, we get to see Poe Dameron a lot in the early days, or kind of early days, I guess, of the Resistance, and we get to kind of understand a little bit more of how they came to be and like what they actually are and what the group is in relation to the New Republic. But again, I kind of alluded to this earlier in the video, there was a lot of places where they set up like events and characters and plot lines that could have been really good and really memorable, but then just kind of dropped the ball. Like, for instance, two characters that I really liked through the whole show were Captain Doza and the ace pilot Griff, right? They were two ex-Imperials that left the Empire before the Battle of Endor, and then they saw the threat of the New Order, the First Order, and then they kind of, they were against what the First Order was doing because they had seen it all before. And instead of kind of diving into like Captain Doza's backstory, who he was an Imperial officer that left the Empire, and then at least one of his pilots followed him, which I would imagine more pilots followed him as well, but we don't get to see those characters. And because the show never really dives into his backstory, even just a little bit, honestly, we only see his old Imperial uniform that he just hides in his closet, which that is never addressed. Like, Kaz finds the uniform and is wondering, wow, what, Doza was an Imperial? Like, they set that up as some big plot line to like dive into Doza's backstory, and then just don't do it. And like, the Imperial uniform in the closet is never mentioned again, not even by the First Order when they go and search his office later on when they're looking for Kaz and stuff. It just doesn't get addressed again. We see it in like one scene of just one random episode, and then that's the last we ever hear about it. And so I just feel like they had the opportunity to make a really great character and kind of dive in depth into like the motivations for these old Imperials that then realized that the Empire was just oppressing people and decided to leave. And then, of course, there's Griff, one of my other favorite characters from the show, who was an ex-TIE fighter pilot, that we learn a bit more about his character throughout the show, kind of, and one line that he has that I absolutely love is, I forget exactly what episode this comes from, and I forget the whole context specifically, but there is a conversation between Griff and some of the other ace pilots as they're flying their ships. I think they're doing a training mission or something to prepare to, fight off the First Order, and one of the ace pilots says, wow, I didn't think you Imperials cared about one another, or something like that, because I think they were practicing having, practicing fighting in pairs and having wingmen and all that stuff. And then Griff replies with, "We didn't, that's why we lost the war." And that was just, it was just a throwaway line in the context of the overall episode, right? But that was a line that stuck out to me the most because, again, that was something that they could have dived into if the show had more episodes and more seasons, and if the show was actually focused on kind of filling in the blanks in regards to the New Republic versus the Resistance, and then how the First Order came to be, and that kind of stuff. But instead of doing that, Resistance mainly focused on just the crew of the Colossus doing their own thing, and I think that was why I didn't really enjoy Season 2 too much, was just because at least the early parts of Season 2 felt like the show was just about the crew of the Colossus and nothing else. I mean, sure, there was the tie-in with the crew going to Dakar and seeing the remnants of the battle there that we see in the opening scene of The Last Jedi, which that part was cool, right? I'll admit that. But overall, it just felt like the First Order became like a background problem that wasn't really, that wasn't a pressing issue, I guess, is how I would describe it, right? So you have the crew of the Colossus just kind of doing their own thing, and then occasionally the First Order shows up, and somehow they manage to bring it back around in the last few episodes of the season to then have the crew of the Colossus fighting off the First Order Star Destroyer and saving everybody, and woohoo, the happy endings and all that, right? Which, I mean, sure, it's a feel-good show for kids at the end of the day. Like, I'm putting way too much stock into what it actually was, but I think the reason that I don't really like it like I like the Clone Wars or Rebels is just because it dropped the ball on so many occasions, and it just felt so separated from everything else in that timeline, in that era. Like, you had the little bit of a tie-in with The Force Awakens, and then a little bit of a tie-in with The Last Jedi, but then after that, then the First Order suddenly just becomes this background villain, and they aren't really a problem or a threat. Well, they are kind of like here and there, but not really until the final episodes. And I feel like if they had a third season, it would have, and probably should have, filled in that year gap between Episode 8 and Episode 9 with the Colossus and the crew of the Colossus, you know, actually getting involved with the Resistance more and everything like that, and seeing the Resistance kind of rise to power now that they've publicly presented themselves, like they destroyed Hosni Prime and that kind of stuff, which the Hosni Prime thing is actually something else that I don't really like about either Resistance or The Force Awakens, because I feel like both the movie and the show kind of glossed over the fact that the First Order destroyed an entire star system. And not just some random star system, they destroyed the entire capital system of the Republic, and then took over the galaxy and got control of every major system within months of them destroying Hosni Prime. Like, that is a big deal. That should be a big deal, and I guess it's kind of one of those things that also, like, the destruction of Alderaan was kind of glossed over in A New Hope, and then only in the ancillary material later on was, like, the importance of Alderaan and the repercussions of the destruction of Alderaan kind of addressed. And I feel like once we actually get more ancillary material, either some more books or TV shows or whatever that actually, you know, address all of this stuff, that's the only time we're actually going to learn any of this and learn the importance of Hosni Prime and all that stuff. It's just one of those things where, like, I feel like that should have been addressed, that should be addressed on screen. Now, I'm one of those people that I don't need to have every little detail of Star Wars explained to me, like, in context in order for me to enjoy a movie or a show, right? Like, I can deal whatever. Like, throw me right into the scene, like, okay, these are the stakes, these are the characters, this is what they're doing, this is who they're fighting, bam. Like, I can roll with that perfectly fine, right? But it's just, there's some stuff that I just feel like needs to be addressed plainly or on screen or presented in a way that the majority of the people watching that certain thing or consuming that certain media would be able to understand. And the destruction of Hosni Prime and basically the entirety of the New Republic in one fell swoop by the First Order is something that I feel like should probably have a little bit more importance on screen than it actually did. But I'm kind of getting off topic now. So, all in all, again, my thoughts on Resistance are it was fun, it was good for what it was, which was a kid show, again, directed at children like 10 and younger. For the kids that are just getting into Star Wars and just now discovering a galaxy far, far away, I think it was a good show to serve that purpose, but I do think we still need a show like the Clone Wars, probably not like Rebels, probably more like the Clone Wars, to fill in the gap between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, and if not that whole 30 years, just the 6 years between when Leia started the Resistance and when The Force Awakens happens. Like, I will be plenty happy with that as long as it fills in some gap, as long as it displays the importance of what is happening in the galaxy at the time period and all of that good stuff. But those are my thoughts on Resistance, and I feel like if I keep talking, I'll just be rambling for hours and hours and hours about the show. If you haven't watched it, I do recommend watching it. It is fun, it is good. If you're interested in learning a bit more about the sequel trilogy timeline, then it's a fun show to get into that kind of stuff. And besides, if you already have a Disney Plus subscription, you might as well watch it, because it's already there. But that is all I had to say about Star Wars Resistance. As always, I would love to know what you think down in the comments below. Did you enjoy the show? Have you watched the show? Or just what do you think of Star Wars Resistance in all, I guess. That is all the time I've got for today. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you dropped a like, as those really do help a small channel like this, and consider subscribing if you want to see more Outer Rim Cantina content in your subscription feeds every week. That's all the time I've got for today. I hope to see you back here in the cantina on Thursday for another Star Wars video. Until then, may the Force be with you.